Hello and welcome to Business Lessons from the Military. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're here every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific Time, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, to talk about military history, military doctrine, the practices of great military leaders, and how we can translate that into lessons for ourselves in our business and professional lives. So today I'm going to do something a little bit different than I've done before. And that is, I'm going to look at a famous battle from World War II. It's called Operation Market Garden. And it happened 80 years ago this summer. It happened, I believe, in June. It could be July. But anyway, 80 years ago this summer. And the situation was that, I'm sorry, it was not, it was July. That's right, because D-Day happened in June. So the situation was that the Allied invasion at Normandy had taken place June 6, 1944. And the Allies had successfully gotten a foothold on northern continental Europe. And the hope was that the war would be over, World War II in Europe at least, would be over by Christmas. There was this thing going around. Well, we're gonna bring the boys home by Christmas. All this kind of stuff, right? And the leading players, if you will, at that time were General Eisenhower, Dwight Eisenhower, who was the supreme commander of the Allied forces in Europe. Okay, he oversaw literally everything. And then Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery basically was in charge of all ground operations. So Field Marshal Montgomery was the senior English commander in the European theater of war. And he had been very successful in Northern Europe, and that's really where his fame came from. He had basically beaten the Desert Fox, Rommel, the great German general. And then he had gone on to fight in Sicily, and he was kind of in a race with General George Patton, who could get to Palermo first and cut off the German retreat from Sicily into Italy. And if you've ever seen the eponymous movie Patton, you know that Patton beat Montgomery and was one of the biggest, probably the biggest rival in World War II, was that between Field Marshal Montgomery and General Patton. So moving forward now, you may be wondering, wait a minute, what happened to Patton, right? So again, if you've ever seen the film Patton, so George Patton had a tendency to stick his foot in his mouth, and while Eisenhower badly wanted Patton to be a part of D-Day, politically he was not able to do so because at what Patton thought was an off-the-record event to open a welcome center in England to there was a place for American and British military people to go and have a donut and a cup of coffee kind of thing and talk to the hostesses there. Patton had made a speech about how the Allies were going to rule the world after the defeat of Nazi Germany, and he left Russia out of the group of allies that he mentioned. And this, of course, upset Stalin, and Stalin complained. And this wasn't the first time Patton had stuck his foot in his mouth. And this time, Eisenhower felt he could not overlook it, and so he sidelined Patton. And Patton was basically the decoy around which much of the strategy for D-Day was developed. And so when it came to the landings in the immediate aftermath, Patton was not involved with that. Um, and so the Allies are, breaking out now from the Normandy beaches, and the idea was they wanted to get into northern Germany across the Rhine as quickly as they could, because the Ruhr, which was the northern part of Germany, was the industrial heartland of Germany, and if the Allies could capture that, they could dramatically reduce armament production by Nazi Germany, and in so doing, they thought, again, dramatically shorten the length of time the war continued, and so Field Marshal Montgomery came up with a bold plan, and it was called Operation Market Garden. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you can see a little bit about it. Here we go. Okay. So this is the Netherlands here, as you see, and here's Germany, here's the Rhine. And the idea was the Allies wanted to go sweep like this and into northern Germany, into the Ruhr, which is not quite on this map. So the strategy was to mount an offensive, starting basically at Eindhoven in the Netherlands, and going sort of point to point for a number of bridges. So the main pattern was from Eindhoven to Nijmegen, and then to Oosterbeek and Arnhem. Okay, and then there were two sort of smaller bridges, Vegel and Grave, in between. And the idea for the battle was to do what became the largest airborne battle in history, at least up until that point, by dropping brigades of airborne troops at Nijmegen, Oosterbeek, and Arnhem, and they would hold the bridges while the ground forces, infantry and armor, went from kind of point to point to relieve them, and in so doing would recapture all of the Netherlands and set the stage to then go into northern Germany. Okay, and if you can see down here in the text. So British 30th Corps would advance from the bridges and cross the Rhine and its tributaries. Okay, and the bridges were Eindhoven, Nijmegen, and Arnhem, basically, and there were other ones in between. Okay, so it was a daring plan, and if it had worked, it might very well have resulted in a dramatic shortening of the war. Okay, so the airborne operation was launched, and here you can see certain pictures of it and such. Okay, and I'm gonna play you now a short video. It's a 2-minute video that talks about the battle. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing here, and we'll go back. Here we go. It's a 2-minute video, and this, it really puts on display how things worked out. Okay, so here we go. Okay. So that gives you a flavor. You saw some of the people there. You saw Bernard Montgomery. You saw some of the bridges. It has that gritty black and white look to it. That's always so interesting when you're when one is viewing World War II history. Okay, so the narrator described what the plan was and that it didn't work. Okay, so the question is, why didn't it work? And there are several factors. Number one, um, there was not enough airborne transport for the First Airborne Army to land the three divisions where they needed to go. That was one problem. Now, by the way, I don't know that any individual problem was fatal in and of itself. The Allies were typically short of things throughout World War II, whether it was watercraft for fording rivers, whether it was trucks for bringing supplies forward, whether it was aircraft. It always seemed that there was never enough. Okay, so in and of itself, the fact that there weren't enough airborne transports, that may not have been a problem. The second was the intelligence gathered about the German forces in the area turned out to be inaccurate. And in fact, the Germans had much stronger forces in the area than the Allies anticipated. So that was another difficult factor. A third factor was because of the nature of the Netherlands, and the Netherlands is actually it's actually underwater. It's only because there are dikes holding the ocean back that the whole country isn't flooded. And throughout the country, there are dikes and such in order to traverse certain parts of the country and not get bogged down in swamps. So when it came to moving quickly from bridge to bridge for the infantry and armor, a lot of times they had to go in single columns. And if a tank broke down, that caused a massive delay because they couldn't get around it. And so they ended up not being able to move nearly as quickly as they thought they would. Excuse me. And this was particularly difficult because although they had three airborne divisions holding the various bridges, an airborne division is smaller than an infantry division. And because they were airborne, they were only carrying, for the most part, light weapons, right? And they found themselves against a much larger German force than they anticipated. And so, while, as the narrator mentioned, there were heroic efforts on the part of these airborne soldiers, they were required to hang on for a much longer time than was anticipated in the original plan. So, why did these things happen? Why were there not enough transport? Why was there not, good intelligence? Why did they not anticipate the problems of moving forward? Well, I think there's several things going on there. One is, and I mentioned this just a moment ago, the Allies were perpetually short of all kinds of things, and so in authorizing Operation Market Garden to go forward, I think Eisenhower, took the position. Well, we never have enough of anything, so we can't let that hamper us in making this move. In terms of the intelligence, the reality is, and this is something I think that when we only watch movies about war and such, doesn't necessarily sink in. Generally speaking, we don't know that intelligence is wrong until after the fact, right? So there's a lot of effort done to gather information, to analyze it, sift through it, and get as clear an intelligence picture as we can. But in the end, there's no way really of knowing whether the intelligence gathered is accurate. You hope it is. And the best you can do is act on the information that you have. The Germans had made some efforts to sort of disguise, if you will, the strength of their forces, which wasn't unusual. All armies do that. And so, and one can't necessarily say, oh well, the intelligence people were incompetent or whatever. It's just in the fog of war, it's very difficult to gather the kind of information that the accuracy of information, I think, is a better way of explaining it, than that you would really want to have. Now, the third thing is, and this was another perpetual issue in the initial few months of the invasion of Northern Europe, and that is the Allies encountered conditions that they did not anticipate. So in the breakout from Normandy, what happened was, after they got off the beaches, they got into what was known as the hedgerow country. So what were hedgerows? Hedgerows were very densely grown borders of basically bushes that separated fields, because Normandy was essentially an agricultural area in France. And as the Germans withdrew from the beaches and retreated, they withdrew from hedgerow to hedgerow, and they could be behind a hedgerow, which was a very effective screen for them. And they could have their machine guns there, they could have their artillery, and regular tanks could not get through the hedgerows. And so the typical way that an advance worked is you set your artillery in the front and you had infantry following behind. And the idea was the artillery would kind of break through, and then the infantry would kind of mop up. Unless you came to a situation where there was too much massed armor and anti-tank weapons, in which case then the infantry would take the lead to wipe those out, and then the armor would move forward. So when it came to the hedgerows, the armor couldn't get through. When I say armor, I mean basically tanks. The tanks couldn't get through, but if you sent your infantry forward, they were decimated because the enemy was protected by the hedgerows, but they could shoot from basically behind the hedgerows, but through them with their machine guns and such, and wipe out the attacking infantry. And so the Allies had to develop mechanisms to mount on the front of their tanks that could tear down these hedgerows. And that was one of the strengths of the Allied war effort, especially the American part of the Allied war effort, is they were very resourceful in figuring out solutions to these things. And so if you've ever seen tanks with these sort of, like, they almost look like rollers, they were like big rollers in front of them, they would just like chew up everything in front of them. Others that had these sort of things, they almost look like a sort of a snow plow, but like a pointed snow plow, that they would cut through these hedges, right? And so, but the key thing is, the Allies did not anticipate these problems. They dealt with them as they moved forward. Okay, well, so in the breakout from Normandy and going through the hedgerows, right, there was no sort of airborne troops that they had to connect up with within a certain time frame, right? So the fact that it took them much longer to move through that section of Normandy, while it took longer, it didn't mean that there was the loss of a battle per se. In the case of Operation Market Garden, when they didn't anticipate the very narrow lanes they had to move through in order to go from bridge to bridge to connect up with the airborne forces that were, what that meant was the plan essentially didn't work, okay, because the airborne troops were just not in a position to hang on, for multiple weeks. They could hang on for a few days, which is what they did, and they actually hung on longer than it was anticipated they would. But in the end, they were not strong enough against German armor, German artillery, etc. Okay, and so these unanticipated issues, really, that's what I think did in Operation Market Garden. So while candidly, I'm not a Montgomery fan. Those of you who watch the show, you know I'm a Patton fan, right? Um, and I'll just add here, by the way, that I think there was another factor. I've never seen this discussed anywhere in any of the things I've read about Operation Market Garden. And by the way, probably the most well-known book is called A Bridge Too Far, by Cornelius Ryan. And there's a famous movie based on the not the novel, on the book as well, A Bridge Too Far, and it comes from this idea. I'm going to share my screen again so you can see this clearly. So they did get all the way to Nijmegen, but they couldn't get to Arnhem. Arnhem was a bridge too far. That's where the name of Ryan's book comes from, right? And so while I give Montgomery credit for coming up with this plan, I would argue he was the wrong person to execute it. I think Patton might have actually pulled the plan off, because it was really playing to Patton's strength, this idea of pushing forward no matter what and not letting anything stop him. That was Patton's brilliance as a field commander, and it's why, by the way, I think he never rose to the positions that, for example, Omar Bradley held, and of course that Eisenhower held. That was not Patton's forte. He was not a political general. He was a field general. He wanted to be down there fighting the battles, and nobody fought the kind of battle better, this sort of fast maneuver battle better than Patton. He was probably better than the Germans were at it, as is evidence that Patton beat not I'm going on his name, the Desert Fox. Not that he beat the Desert Fox head to head in Northern Africa, Rommel, but again, as you see in the movie, he did beat Rommel's plan, which is close to the same thing. And so, if anyone was going to find a way to quickly deal with the problem of having to go down this narrow lane, it would have been George Patton. But he had been sidelined for political reasons. So, what are the lessons for us in the business and professional world that come out of Operation Market Garden? Well, one of them is that bold action is worth the risk. Just recognize it's not always going to pay off. Now, one of the interesting things is, after the failure of Market Garden, Montgomery never planned a bold operation again. He became much more careful about what he did. And that was unfortunate for the Allies, because a bold Montgomery and a bold Patton could have ended the war more quickly, in my opinion. Okay, so we can't let failures, even big failures, and I believe something like 13,000 out of 20,000 airborne troops were either killed, wounded, or captured. Right, so almost 3/4. Right, that's a huge loss. It decimated the airborne divisions, and it took time for them to build up again. So, but notwithstanding the size of the loss, that doesn't mean that that bold chances shouldn't be taken if they're properly calculated. The reality is, they wouldn't be bold if they were sure things, right? So we have to be willing to take some risks, sometimes some big risks, right? People deride, for example, the whole situation with New Coke. If you, many of you may be too young to remember that. I was a young man when that happened. Coca-Cola came out with a new recipe for its flavor that was much closer to Pepsi. It was much sweeter than Coca-Cola was. It was a disaster. However, in the end, it was worth doing because Coca-Cola learned a lot from it, which is people were very, very loyal to their product. And that's a good thing to know. They wouldn't have known it if they hadn't made that big, huge mistake, and they were able to recover from it. Okay. Now, it wasn't easy. It was embarrassing. It was lots of things. But in the end, it was, I would argue, it was a good thing for Coca-Cola because it allowed them to really figure out what do we need to be doing. So we need to take big risks, even when we have big failures. That shouldn't dissuade us from taking those big risks. That's number one. Number two, sometimes, maybe all the time, we're not going to have the resources we need. Now, we need to look at it from the standpoint of how critical is it for us, how critical is it, this lack of resources? Is it going to inevitably cause the failure of our plans? Or is it a calculated risk, but we can mitigate or diminish the risk through other means, compensate for the fact that we don't have enough of this because we've got this? So maybe we have a plan, and it's going to take a lot of people to execute the plan, and we just don't have the personnel. But maybe the quality of the personnel we have is so good, and we can motivate them to dig so deeply that they can overcome the lack of numbers. Okay, you see this in war movies all the time, of course, but in the business world too, we can motivate our people. We can get them to perform extraordinarily. Maybe not for months and years on end, but maybe we can do it over the short term well enough that we can execute a bold plan and be successful. Okay. Now, we can't be 100% sure of that, but maybe we can be 75%, 80% sure of that. Is that enough to go forward with our plans? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. That's going to be a judgment call that we're going to have to make. But we shouldn't be completely dissuaded by lack of resources. We should look for compensating strategies, okay, and then assess, will this compensate enough to justify taking the risk? Okay, third, unforeseen conditions, okay? We have to assume that we're not going to anticipate everything when we go to execute a plan. There's going to be some things that come up we just didn't anticipate. That's fine. Okay? We're not going to be able to prepare for it because we don't know what it is, but we can mentally, emotionally, even spiritually prepare for the fact that that something unknown is going to crop up, so that we're in a mindset to deal with it most effectively. Now, how do we do that? Well, one is just what I said. Another is we put people in key positions who are the best at that kind of improvised decision-making and action. Okay? And sometimes that may mean putting people there who, gosh, they may cause us other troubles. They may be a little bit more difficult to manage. Okay, they may shoot their mouths off in a way we don't want them to. Okay, but if in the end they might mean the difference between success or failure, again, we need to assess that risk and potentially use those people and just set the ground rules as well as we can, so that we lower the opportunity for them to do damage while we increase the likelihood that our bold plans will be successful. So that's the lessons that I draw from Operation Market Gardens, and I'm sure there are others we could draw, but I wanted to do something relatively straightforward, limited, 3 points. Okay, and this is one of the fun parts about studying military history is how can we apply it to these other things. And so I invite your thoughts, your comments, especially if you're into military history and you know about Market Garden. What do you think? So drop a comment into social media, send me an email. Happy to engage with you there. So that's our show for today. Kind of fun, a little bit different. I want to do more of. I'm hoping to do more of these in the future. So do if you have a moment, let me know what you thought. So tomorrow at 10 a.m. Is my show People Making Money, and we will be talking about the 4 questions every entrepreneur must be able to answer. Okay, and then next Monday at 10 a.m., these are all Pacific time, is my show Trust and Estates Weekly. And then 7 days from today, we'll be back for the next edition of Business Lessons from the Military. So I thank you very much for watching, wishing you a wonderful rest of the day, and signing off. Marie, darling, you are my belle. All the best.